Waterman from Ferrara Candy Store, and Josh Peterson from American Family Insurance. Unfortunately, our Walgreens partners are not able to join this morning. They're here online, but we're having some technical difficulties with bringing them on. So we're going to actually just hop into the panel discussion with Josh and Emma. And first and foremost, if you guys can do a little brief interjection about yourselves, what you do at your companies, your respective companies, we just love to have that little background about each of you.
You
Josh,
bet.
would you go first?
Sure thing. Yep. Thanks for having me, Brittany. Josh Peterson with American Family Insurance. I'm the Workplace Development Director at American Family, and that really means I oversee a team that's responsible for workspace, interior design, workplace environment, a construction project management team, and a space and relocation team. So we're responsible for space allocations across the American Family enterprise. So it's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks again for the opportunity.
And hi, everyone. I'm Emma Waterman. I'm with Ferrara Candy Company. I oversee our workplace experience team across our North American portfolio. So primarily our Chicago headquarters, which was brand new at the start of the pandemic, as well as the construction and development of our satellite offices.
Thank you, Emma. So to get this kicked off, first question is for you, Emma. At Ferrara Candy Company, you had this big reopening plan for July, and you got all ramped up for all of your facilities. Tell us about that experience, and tell us about maybe your top obstacles that you ran into while you were gearing up for that July opening.
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that's unique about Ferrara, well, not very unique, but we are a production company and we have production facilities across North America as well that is considered an essential business. So when we first closed our offices, our plants were still up and running, and we wanted to have a fairly rapid but thoughtful return to office as well, kind of to be allies to our production facilities. And what we learned pretty quickly was we obviously wanted to ground ourselves in the government standards, our employee sentiment, and what every company was trying to do at the time. And we spent the entire month of June, myself and my team, on site, tidying the space, preparing our cleaning plan, installing the thermal camera, and all of that. And come July 6th, our grand reopening, out of 600 corporate employees, only about 10 showed up. And that made us realize pretty quickly that we needed to pivot. And this entire time we knew that, there's always a big asterisk at the end of all of our communications saying this is subject to change. We're one of our values is agility, and we wanted to be agile as we learn from our employees. And so very quickly we realized that there is an appetite for a small population of our office to be open. But similar to the Walgreens presentation, it's how do we pivot the service that we're providing on site? How do we adjust so that we're keeping our employees safe, particularly our essential employees on site, like my workplace team, while also creating a space for individuals who, for whatever reason, couldn't really work out of their homes. So rather than having full service kitchens open, all of that, we worked with a small number of people that we're going to be on site and say, what do you really need? And they said, you know what? We don't need the fancy coffee machines or anything, but like maybe a Keurig. So we bought them a Keurig, put it in the cafe, asked them to take their trash out in the cafe versus in their individual desks, because we didn't want a cleaning crew sorting through 600 desks. And, it was really creating not our previous experience, but the new custom experience and experience at scale. So understanding that what we're doing right now for 10 people will change for 50, will change for 300, and will change for 600, if and when we ever have 600 people back in our office. And really just changing almost on a daily basis. So that was one of our key learnings. And then another one that Brittany, I mentioned to you earlier, was we discovered that just basic succession planning of my team being on site together isn't the smartest idea. because if one of us goes down, all of us go down, and we can't support our offices anymore, even for the small population that we had. So we quickly pivoted on that as well and decided that we were only going to do half the team on site any given day, if that, and make sure that we have backups and safeguards in place.
That's an excellent of your learnings as a result of you preparing for that July debut that kind of fell flat and you kind of had to pivot, but it sounds like you have been doing an excellent job of being agile. I think everybody, even if that wasn't like a value internal to their company, has had to adjust every step of the way as they're planning throughout. So that's really, really cool. And then I really liked your response about just custom needs. You really had that feedback loop going for the individuals that are on site, and you know that you will have to continue to have that feedback loop about what do you actually need and identify those things. So really, really cool. Thank you for sharing that, Emma. So Josh, you and I work together, so I get to hear a lot about this in great depth. But for you to share with the rest of the audience here, right now, the tentative date of opening up is January 2021, the earliest. But I know there's a lot of evaluation of real estate. What kind of considerations are we taking into account?
Thanks, Brittany. Yeah, and you're right, hot off the press, as a matter of fact, we indicated January of 2021 was our earliest next stage of return. And just within the last few hours, we've pushed that out. We're moving away from any specific dates, just as a recognition that this is really an unpredictable situation. So first and foremost, it's all about safety. Very quickly, we adapted, as you indicated, to a remote workforce. And so across the enterprise, we have about 14,000 employees. I'd say that over the last 7 months, we've learned more about remote work and our ability to maintain productivity than we have in the last 7 years. And so really right now, the conversation continues to be focused on safety. We have a team that's put together that's focused on physical distancing. So the number of employees that don't have the option to work elsewhere, work remotely, their job requires them to be in the office. We're making sure that they are safe, and we've got good physical distancing plans to make sure that they can do their work in a safe manner. We've got folks focused on how we get food and beverage in to support those folks in a safe way. A work stream that's focused on PPE, vendors and visitors, gathering and travel, signage and communication, and then sanitization and hygiene. But we've also recognized that as we've realized just how productive our workforce can be, there might be an opportunity here to enhance workplace flexibility for our employees. We've been surveying them quite a bit throughout this pandemic. And what we've heard is that a lot of folks would prefer to have more flexibility, more options, more choice in determining where they work based on their needs. So we think there's an opportunity to offer greater choice, and while also, focusing on what could be good for the business. So we've kicked off a work stream called Reimagining Normal, and I'm sure many organizations are using that same tagline. As we start to think about our location strategy and our workplace of the future strategy, it's all about rationalizing and reducing our real estate portfolio. We're moving away from the assumption of having an office to one where we start to target and prioritize specific in-office activities like collaboration, innovation, project work, things of that nature. So initially, when we thought about return to office and we thought about reimagining normal, they were two separate work streams. More and more, they are becoming one. And as I mentioned, we've moved away from that January date, and we're moving away from even thinking about a stage 3 to one in which let's bring folks back into locations that we know are going to remain within the portfolio, and make sure that we do it in a safe way so that we limit the amount of disruption to their daily work. We'll bring them back if we know with confidence that that workspace will remain. But we're also taking this opportunity to reevaluate how to increase utilization within the office. So we're transitioning from a more traditional 1-to-1 seating ratio concept to one that embraces a more activity-based model to, again, really hone in on those activities that we're going to be targeting. We'd prefer to have the focused heads down work primarily work from home, where that makes sense. And then again, prioritize those collaboration project type activities for in the office.
Thank you for sharing that, Josh. I think that, yeah, and there's that agile mindset of, okay, well, what's the date? How are we pivoting once again based upon the desire to really reduce the risk, right? We want to keep everybody healthy. We want to keep everybody safe. The consideration is around the employee. That's something that came up a number of times. It's about the people. It's about making sure that we can support them. It's about making sure that we can continue trainings, continue whatever it is that everybody needs in order to be the most productive and, stay well. So I think that speaks to the plans that we have at AmFam. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm gonna throw a question here at you guys that maybe each of you weren't prepared for, but we'll go ahead and see if you're able to answer. So those who are affected directly from working from home, what could you talk a little bit about some of those prominent impacts to team? How does that look from a collaboration standpoint? Have you just transitioned to Zoom, Skype, whatever it is, and what are those challenges and how are you hurdling them? So Emma, could you start?
Yeah, definitely. So we were very lucky that in our headquarters investment, we also did an investment in Zoom technology. So our corporate ecosystem was grounded in Zoom already because we did have a hybrid workforce solution of at least 1 day remote a week. So whenever we had meetings, there would be people dialed in via Zoom almost always. So the main hurdle we had to jump was less about how are we going to get our day-to-day meetings done, but there were two key things that we had to solve for. One was particularly for our innovation team and for our marketing team and so many different teams is getting product in people's hands. And that's where my team really grew and it was their time to shine because we support mail and package services at the headquarters and we pivoted to having mail and package go out to our employee base. And shout out to our site manager. She was going on site every week and bringing things to her home and basically running a UPS out of her home to get the product that was needed to our executives and to our in-tech team. And then one thing that our kind of future of work task force, one of the first things that we really were tasked with from our leadership team down was how do we maintain employee culture? How do we maintain the water cooler collaboration and things like that? And I can't say I have a full answer to that now, but it is something that we're like, okay, we know that we can work successfully and we can work 95% of the way there in the way that we did before, but that intangible collaboration, how much are we losing? And we can't quantify that yet. So we're looking into different tools to support that. One is the Donut app. I'm just starting that research right now, which is around organic pop-in meetings that are that water cooler conversation sort of meetings. And the other is just about thorough training around Zoom and partnering with our D&I team to make sure that we're hosting inclusive video meetings so that, you start by going around the horn, acknowledging every person in the room, making sure that they are welcome to contribute rather than just being another face in a box that two people are talking and everyone else is listening. So it's really about how do we utilize the tools we already have to make sure that we are trying to mimic that in-person experience as much as possible.
Oh my goodness, Emma, that was really awesome. Like I love that you're doing that and you're focusing on training in order to just create that culture of inclusion. I think that's superb. I mean, to your point, that's got to be a challenge for a lot of organizations to mimic that water cooler talk. Even for this conference, right? It's how do you mimic that bump and connect experience that you typically would get. And later today, we're going to be able to test that feature in our networking later today. So, it's about finding those kind of nooks and crannies to create those nuanced conversations, right? Like it's a challenge, but we all desire it, right? And I think it's really superb what you're doing and the intentionality behind it.
Definitely.
Josh, what about you?
Well, much like Emma, we were fortunate. We learned AmFam is headquartered in Madison, Wisconsin, and a few years ago we were impacted by the polar vortex. There were a number of days where we shut the office down and had people work remotely, and we recognized the impact on productivity. So we also started our transition to the Zoom technology, had started making investments in our offices to create some one-touch rooms. So people were familiar with the technology, they were starting to utilize it. And again, it was very fortunate for us. So it allowed us to really shift and adapt pretty quickly. But I will say, Zoom fatigue is a real thing. Brittany and I talk about this all the time with our team. So we've been trying to find intentional ways to stay connected. We do 2 weekly department huddles with our team. Oftentimes they're unscripted, no agenda. It's just an opportunity to connect with each other, talk about what's working, what's not working. We've created some team sites where we encourage folks to highlight things that are going on in their lives, things that they're learning that are working for them and are not working for them. We're also really, as an organization, honed in on the impact that this is having to working parents. There are many folks, myself included, you may hear my son in the background, who are managing supporting their children going to school. Now that schools are back in session, while also trying to manage their day. And so, making sure that people understand that when their work gets done isn't as important as, the fact that it does get done. So more flexibility about enabling folks to do their work at times that work best for them. Encouraging folks to put time on their calendars that are dedicated to their family or to providing support to any caregiving situation that they may need to do. But also now starting to really think about reevaluating our leadership competencies, encouraging our leaders to think more like an intrapreneur and managing their team like a small business, empowering them to make better decisions or more decisions to support their team in this time of so much uncertainty. Evaluating different technologies. I mentioned Zoom fatigue. It's been a wonderful tool. It's been very effective. Thankful that we have it. But when it comes to collaboration and innovation, we've struggled a bit with not having the opportunity to get in a room together and be able to whiteboard. So, we're challenging our IT partners to continue to think outside the box, work with us collaboratively as we start to transition our offices to that activity-based model so that when we do start coming back to the office, there's equity from a perspective of folks that are working from home versus working in the office. Everybody feels like they are at the table and able to participate and collaborate, regardless of where they're working from, and making sure that we have the opportunity to understand those standards and prepare the office from an infrastructure perspective so that when that day comes, we're ready and it's seamless.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Josh. So one last question for the 2 of you. If you have any other lessons learned that you would like to share as a result of what we've been through thus far, because there's going to continue to be a ton. But if you have any specific ones that you'd like to share, I think, Emma, you mentioned a couple. Stephanie had some really good ones. But yeah, Emma, do you have specific ones that you'd like to leave us with before we wrap up?
Yeah. To run through all the facilities, lessons learned, the right signage and things like that. But I think that one thing as a team leader that, our company did such an amazing job in checking in on mental health, checking in on, providing opportunities for parents and caregivers to take breaks and everything. And one thing that a lot of workplace professionals, I think, get caught in is we were go in those first few months. And we paused in about August and said, you know what? This is a long marathon. This is not a sprint that we thought it was. And so how do we create a sustainable program for now that, again, has that agility for the future that allows for the workplace team to breathe a little bit? And, having the ability to be okay with taking PTO again, which was something that we weren't comfortable with in the beginning, and understanding that it is not, again, not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so that's my piece of advice to anyone who's watching right now, whether you're in the workplace profession or not, is to acknowledge that, okay, we got through this initial hurdle and we know that it's everyone tried to go back sooner than they were able to. And now we have a time to pause, reflect, and move forward with a more sustainable solution, both for the people that are organizing it and for the larger workforce.
Thank you, Emma.
Yep.
Josh?
I think my biggest lesson learned is being authentic and transparent with your teams, recognizing that this is a stressful time for everyone. There's so much uncertainty in the world right now. Hone in on where you can make a difference, where you can create some certainty and clarity, and where you don't, where you can't, be honest about it. It's okay to say, I don't know. I think people recognize and realize that we're all living through a crisis. And, quite honestly, many crises on top of one another, all at the same time. So giving people some grace and also being your authentic self, and just, acknowledging that it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to approach your team and let them know that you're open for ideas, and that the only way we're going to get through this is to do it together. That's my overarching theme around lessons learned is, if you happen to be in the role of leadership, it's okay to say, I don't have an answer for you.
Yeah, excellent. And one thing I've noticed from our leadership, they've been trying to do, company huddles and sharing with us what they do know and what they don't know as well. And I think we've been seeing that from top down. So I think that I would second that's been really valuable to kind of see that, being authentic, being genuine, sharing how you feel about what's going on. I think that's my style and maybe your style too, Josh. But in addition to that, I think everybody, needs to just kind of be a little bit vulnerable these days and let everybody know, like, things are going to be all right and we're going to figure it out. Let's be collaborative. Let's continue to be collaborative. And I think probably most organizations, and Emma, you can speak to this, there are a bunch of departments who've never worked together before that are working together to figure this whole thing out. So it speaks to what we can do, and it just opens up the door for opportunity and how our organizations can actually improve our work styles, which is a really cool thing. So with that, that was our last question. I appreciate both of you very much. Thank you for being here. And you know what? I have actually one more lessons learned from Stephanie in the chat, who shared with us in our presentation earlier today. Yes, make sure you work with IT to make sure that everything in the background is working well, even in this conference, right? But in everything else you're doing with Zoom and all your technologies internally. So yeah, that partnership there, that works too. Sweet. So awesome. Thanks again, Josh and Emma. Thank you to all of those who are listening. I appreciate all of you. And we're going to enter into a break. We will start again at 10:55 with Jeff Saunders talking about the experts assessment, the workplace post-COVID-19 and implications on the built environment. Thank you again, Josh and Emma.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone, we're back. Hope you enjoyed your quick break, got some coffee, whatever it is that you need to drink, depending on where you are in the world. So I would like to go ahead and introduce our next speaker. He's joining us here on the screen. Yes, Jeffrey Saunders. He's an expert in strategic futures studies and foresight. He's the CEO of Nordic Foresight and associated partner of behavioral strategy. He formerly served as director at Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, chief consultant at head of Signal Architectures workplace analytics team, and he's a former advisor at the Office of the Secretary of Defense Stability Operations. He has both strategic and practical experience in helping organizations do strategic ambitions into workplace strategies. He has authored many studies and articles on the future of work and the workplace for organizations all around the world. The latest study actually just came out with the International Facility Management Association, who was with us yesterday. And it is specifically around the topic of the new way of working post-COVID. So that's what he's going to share with us a little bit about today. First and foremost, thank you for joining us, Jeff. We're happy to have you here, and I'll hand it off to you.
All right, Brittany, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here, and I wish that I could be participating with you in Chicago and wherever in the United States and the world you may be. And I'm going to be sharing my the work that we did with the International Facility Management Association, EPOS Audio, and JLL about the expert assessment, the workplace post-COVID-19. And this study was based upon the great debate that I saw and we saw in the spring of, the winter to spring of 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic first made a major breakthrough in February, March, and into April, about what were the long-term consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic on the ways that we'd be working. And what we wanted to do was to bring a foundational study that would try to drive some clarity around how is it that workplace experts, strategists, people in corporate real estate and the like were planning and helping and assisting their organizations prepare for the new ways of working. And this debate has raged in the general media, has raged on LinkedIn and many other fora, and different parts of the industries are coming to different conclusions. And what we wanted to do was try to bring some clarity, set some foundations and some baselines where we could actually build and innovate upon those. And this study was intending to do that. And what we did was we used an analytical method called the real-time Delphi methodology. And the real-time Delphi methodology is different from a survey because what we're doing is focusing on a group of subject matter experts. And what we're trying to do is derive a spectrum of diverse perspectives on key questions and assumptions to develop a consensus view on the future in highly uncertain times. And what we used was an online platform that facilitated a dialogue between geographically separated subject matter experts, where they could spend an entire month over the summer of 2020 debating and analyzing each other's perspectives to develop a consensus view on the future of work post-COVID-19, and then where we could also capture their divergent opinions. And so what we got actually over a month of surveying, participating, and discussing with over 250 subject matter experts was over 2,500 comments and debates and answers to 24 questions that we asked. And so the study is bringing the curated perspectives of industry-leading subject matter experts, and what it's intended to do is to assist people in the industry to aid in decision-making, help you understand and orient on the potential opportunities and risks using these expert assessments, identifying where they had consensus, but also exploring where they dissented. And so this is the methodology, and this is the analysis that we brought to bear. And actually, the study was just released yesterday, so this is truly hot off the presses. Now, what we did was to gather the broadest perspective that we could within the industry. We worked with the different communities of practices within IFMA. So people who are focused on sustainability, workplace strategy, consulting, and focusing on the business side, IT, operations and maintenance, health and safety, the real estate perspectives, all these to harness the expert's opinion, the expert's assessment on new ways of working post-COVID-19. And what we could see from the results is that we had a broad spectrum of participation from around the world and also from a number of disciplines and professions. So people who are consulting a number of different businesses around the world, academics, people who are working internally to organizations or external to them, coming from a variety of fields, all of which looking at the workplace post-COVID-19. Now, the purpose of this study is to harvest, of course, insights from industry-leading experts, synthesizing those findings from 6 key areas, and I'll go into those in a bit, to help us better assess current challenges and future priorities, all of which is intended to help you develop your readiness and your resilience as we try to navigate this challenging period of dealing with not just a short-term crisis, which we thought in the spring, many thought in the spring of 2020 that COVID would be, but a long marathon race, as our previous panel was discussing. And so today I'd like to spend a few minutes just presenting a few of the key insights. I hope that this will inspire you to download the summary of findings and even order the final report. If you're an IFMA member, you can access these findings for free. So we focused on 6 thematic areas: facilities and demand, technology development, workplace strategy, employee well-being and benefits, organization and productivity, and sustainable development goals. I can't go through all of this in the brief time that I have available to me, but I'd like to focus on a couple, which is the aspect around the facilities and demand. What does this mean? The transition to remote working and hybrid models mean for the types of facilities that we'd like to utilize? What does this mean for how we organize our workforce and the role that technology plays in that? Not surprising, and the previous panels and today's discussions and today's presentations and the previous day's presentations has shown a shift to increased use of remote working. And the question is to how much this will lead to a shift in remote working. And what we could see from our subject matter experts is that 81% of them expect at least 20%, 26% of workers will be working most of their time remotely post-COVID-19. And this has a number of impacts, obviously, on the real estate and the types of facilities that will be in demand. And this is leading us to see a shift to smaller and more diverse sites. And this is the expectation that many of our subject matter experts have, and 63% of them believe that organizations will be making use of greater use of co-working sites, satellite offices, new types of spaces, and that individual organizations of themselves will have much smaller office footprints as a result. And this leads to a shift. And what we can see from many of the conversations is that the budgets particularly will be shifting from the real estate space as organizations downsize their physical footprints over to the digital experiences. And so we'll see this shift away from buildings and design over towards the digital experience and technologies that better enable organizations to tune the physical spaces that remain. These are going to be some of the key aspects as a result. And it also will shift how we think about the energy investments that we're doing to make buildings more efficient in terms of course, energy and water and waste, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the challenges that comes into this is how do we justify the business case? And this is what some of the conversations that the experts were actually in disagreement upon, where they believe that budgets will be made available to invest in energy efficiency and other types of efficiency improvements, but the business case to justify those investments will be quite challenging because what do we do with all the excess space that we have? And so we see some quite interesting comments from our expert panel, and we start talking about the condition. What will be the market over the next 10 years' time? And what many of them are seeing is that commercial real estate business will be in a state of oversupply. Many think as much as for the next 10 years. And those have to think about how do they use aspects of workplace design to use and to right size the space that they have more efficiently as organizations shrink their portfolio of spaces. And each company will have to figure out in their workplace strategy, their intentional design of their spaces and places to the type of activities and talents they need to attract and the work they need to do. And each company will have to figure out what works best. And so we'll see some quite challenging and potentially some stupid decisions as organizations make some wrong choices. Some will make a shift to 100% remote working because they could think they could save a ton of costs without thinking about the implications that that could have on the innovation capacities of their organizations. Now, this doesn't mean that space will become irrelevant. And as the previous panel was talking about, this is because social connections are still quite important. And our subject matter experts identified their 4 top reasons why people will return to the office. Primarily, we need social interactions. We need to address complex interactions and tasks with one another. Many of us cannot work from home and are dealing with the stresses and tensions of having children at home, having a home working environment that was not designed for 1, 2, or more people to be working and studying and living at home all at the same times. And then also because not all aspects of knowledge work can be done from home. We need access to unique facilities and the like. So these are some of these things that will drive people back to the office. And of course, technology development, such as we're doing now with conducting webinars where we're interacting from around the world, has enabled us to do interactions that we couldn't have done a decade ago to the same degree. These are beneficial, but they're not quite the same experience that we could be having. Right now, I'm giving my presentation to you all, but my audience direct in the room are my 2 dogs. And while they give me a lot of great feedback, it's not quite the same feedback that I would be getting in the interaction with you all in the physical space. And that's something that I miss as I'm doing this presentation now. So these high-level interactions are best in person. And when we talk about the fatigue in Zoom meetings, I don't know how many of you feel quite tired when we do a lot of video conferencing and things like that. It's because that aspect, that communication that you can see from people's face, the micromusculature as their expressions change and things like that. Our brains are tuned or developed to seek out that information. And when we can't get access to it because the technology isn't quite good enough yet, it fatigues us and it also builds some distrust in it as well. So we need space. But what type of spaces will we see moving forward? And what we see from our review of the expert assessment is that demand is shifting. Individual companies will demand less real estate, but within the classes of real estate, we're seeing a shift, or we will see a shift from Class C types of spaces and places over to Class B and towards Class A, the best quality of real estate within a specific market, to co-working locations and new hybrid solutions. And there'll be a lot of movement in the market because even within Class A settings, as organizations shrink their footprints, this will enable a surplus of real estate to emerge, and others will be able to move into these spaces as well. So we'll see a lot of dynamic action in the market even while individual footprints are shrinking. And ultimately, the impacts of what types of services and functionality will become most important depends upon where the talent moves. Humans are social beings, and the cities are social settings, and so this will ultimately bring people back together. Now, this brings in some key aspects, and this was the conversations that we were having in the previous panel about how is it that we should organize and ensure that productivity occurs. And we talk about transparency, and also a key aspect is around trust. And one of the troubling aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic was when many organizations, particularly smaller organizations than the ones that we typically hear about, have been forced into remote working, they have not previously had experience with it. And you have many managers who manage by the old school way of thinking that if I can't see you, then you're probably not working. And so you actually have had an explosion in a lot of workplace monitoring technologies that have provided a big challenge for organizations. So that aspect of maintaining trust is paramount for a successful distributed workforce. These are key aspects that are quite important. And we're seeing a development towards various types of workplace monitoring technologies, which cause some significant challenges. Now, when we presented a mini scenario to our subject matter experts, they soundly rejected activity monitoring and workplace activity monitoring as a viable way to go. But it's a tension in the marketplace that we need to address because it's exploding around the world. Now in Europe, where we have the regulations around digital rights and privacy, GDPR, there is some limitations on that. But in the United States and other markets, this is a challenge that's moving forward. And this is an example of a person who uses activity monitoring, which takes logs applications and websites that workers use, their email activities, their social media, their inputs and keystroke loggings, and what they click on to provide minute-by-minute breakdowns of how people are working. And many of this is being brought into automated processes for disciplining workers. Think about how Amazon is using their automated HR to address their warehouse workers. These are some of the things that we could see in the workplace and some of the things that we should address. And so you see this gentleman, by seeing the way I address my workers, I can see who's working well and doing better, and I can take tasks and activities to actually ensure that they're working well. Can be very big brotherish. This is something that needs to be addressed. And I can see that I'm running short on time. So before I open up an entirely new space in the analytics around diversity and inclusion in the workplace, which is an incredibly important topic, I'll leave the rest of the presentation to be disseminated. But I would like to provide you the link to where you can find out more about the study. You can actually download the summary of findings or the executive summary, which provides overview of the entire report. And if I'm a member, you could access the report for free. And if not, you can purchase it on IFMA's website here. The link is provided, and I hope that you have found the presentation interesting. I wish I could be physically in the room to present with all of you, but I'd like to take the moment and answer any questions that you may have in the few minutes that remain.
Can you tell me a little bit about the research that that talks about the muscular information that really ties to that trust mechanism? Can you tell me about, are there any resources that you were able to pull from in order to really share that information?
Yeah, there's a number of studies, academic studies that were done pre-COVID that talk about some of the issues, and it's both a visual cue about, how can I see when people are interacting, and particularly when you're participating in Zoom meetings within the team and you have like 10, 15 people in the kind of mosaic Brady Bunch view of your colleagues, you just don't see the micro detail of people. And there's studies from Germany and from the United States that point to that, and I can share those with you as well. There's also an aspect around the auditory issue, and if you don't have a good headset and you have a bad internet connection, small delays in the audio transmission actually creates cognitive distrust. There's an innate natural instinct that a delay of a half second or a second makes the person on the receiving end be distrustful of the message that you're conveying. And these are also studies done from Germany about how audio, good quality audio, the good quality of the visuals impact collaboration. So it's not just the fact that we're tired of Zoom meetings. There's the whole aspect around the experience of it that has cognitive impacts of it that wears us out faster.
Very interesting. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Now, towards the end there, you gave us an open loop there. You piqued my interest around the diversity and inclusion conversation. Could you share a little bit about some of the research results around that topic?
No, it's one of the aspects that we started talking about, because it's a question about how you define diversity and inclusion. And even though it's a hot topic, people define it in radically different ways. So one aspect is when the subject matter experts thought that there'd be an increase in diversity inclusion efforts, and the majority felt that way post COVID-19, and particularly with remote work, it would actually enable people to participate in types of jobs they would otherwise not be able to participate in because they don't have to commute. They don't have to commute and other aspects around that. But when you started looking into the comments around it, what you found is that you had two different types of definitions that were emerging. So if you define diversity and inclusion in terms of physical handicaps and cognition differences, so what's called neurodiversity, so if you have ADHD, autism, things like that, that working from home and not having to navigate an office environment could actually help people with these conditions participate in the workforce that they otherwise could not have. Now, if you described diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, and these aspects, you start talking about the digital divide and how the crisis has accelerated the digital divide, because minority communities oftentimes have problems with the challenges of infrastructure in their home settings to be able to work from home. There's aspects around broadband access, and broadband access is a huge issue still in the United States, and people typically talk about rural broadband access, but even in urban areas, and particularly minority communities, many people aren't accessing at broadband speeds to be able to work remotely. So there is some aspects that are quite fundamental that are, maybe an HR issue, definitely an HR issue. Then there's a question about what's the real estate design and facility management role in playing that. And there's a lot of debates to be had around that space, because you could design for diversity, but the question is, how does that interplay, and where the weightings and the definitions around it need to be addressed as well.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to the investment question, right, that you raised earlier. How do you justify those business cases around the investment and the type of investment, and where does it live? I think that's really interesting. Could you share a little bit more about, what are the obstacles? I mean, you kind of mentioned a little bit before that this is a really hard conversation, but what do you think are our organization's primary obstacles to getting alignment?
We actually had a question around that, which is there's lots of challenges. One is the siloed nature of the specializations and getting them to be better aligned. Then you have the aspect around who should lead the transition. and who has the right skill sets and competencies to build a team that function around this? Do you have the C-level backing for it? And then can you get the different organizational maturity levels and the understanding on the investments on the technical side, but also the human-centric side? Can you actually create alignment among those competencies and a kind of recognition of the value that each have to add? And that's some of the things that still need to be addressed. And then there's the aspect around, okay, is this being more digitally driven, particularly as more people work remotely? Then there's the aspect around the whole data and who owns the data and the mess around that. Because you have that whole ecosystem of all these devices, technology platforms, us creating data. And then the question is, who owns it? Who's adding value to it? Who owns the value adding aspects of it? The IT has certain agreements in place with certain providers. FM has different, providers and different standards. HR has their own. How do you integrate all that? That's, all these are challenges, and it's just a big spaghetti mess that you have to kind of pull apart and then try to put back together in a way that makes sense. And adds value to the organization.
Yeah, I'm remembering our podcast now, like even before the pandemic. I mean, we were talking about megatrends and getting alignment to the different parts of the organizations that really have to think about how workplaces support employees and individuals, and it's facilities management, IT, and HR. That's what we talked about then, and it's no different now. Only the circumstances are different, where we'll have to really support in a more comprehensive way. It just heightens the need to do that now that much more so, which is really, really interesting.
And it's a question of how do you integrate these entities together, and you're actually having the emergence of the head of the digital workplace experience, which is adding a new player to the mix. And so that question is how do you bring it together in a way that makes sense for the organization and the intentionality and thinking through. So it's that opportunity for workplace management to really take a step up and take a role in kind of executing and fulfilling on the organizational strategy. And that requires that's the fascinating discussion that's going to be had over the next couple of years of sussing out what that all means.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So just going to give a couple more moments to allow for any questions to come in. Do we have any questions coming in from LinkedIn or YouTube? Okay. All right. Just want to give a quick shout out to Sean DeWillis. Thank you for appreciating the content out there on LinkedIn. I think that's it. I'm not seeing any comments come in here in the in our Hop-In platform, but I do want to thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for your presentation and signing in all the way from Denmark. I really, really appreciate it. Yep.
Thank you. I wish I could be in Chicago and take part in in person, but what can you do?
Yep. Yep. Awesome.
Right. Have a great rest of the event, and we'll catch you all on the flip side.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. So with that, we're going to transition to networking. For those of you who are online, if you have not registered for the event, if you'd like to participate in the networking session that's following right after this, you will need to register at workplaceevents.live/COVID. And you'll be able to enter into the platform. If you also sign up there, you will be able to get access to these recordings post-event. And then also, if you would like to download the workbook so that you can just do a re-evaluation of your strategy now. We've had a lot of time to think through it, but after having the opportunity to listen to some of the presentations today, this might be an opportunity for you to write some things down, figure out how it integrates into your workplace strategy. I think we had some really great nuggets of information that may not get you to a point where you want to course correct, but just enhance even that conversation and be able to speak to some of the research and speak to some of the other organizations that are positioning themselves a particular way. So with that, you can find the workbook at workplaceevents.live/workbook. That's workplaceevents.live/workbook. With that, the networking time will start right after this. And I hope you guys will enjoy that time to bump and connect, trying to create those opportunities for just connecting and having some fun. So thank you everyone for listening to the presentations. I hope you guys had a blast.